What's going on, guys? Aaron from Top Tier Gaming here, and today I'm coming at you with the updated hand trap tier list for the new format. The ban list just became legal Monday of this week on the 13th, so we're still finally in a very fresh format, and I did a hand trap tier list for Photon Hypernova before the ban list was revealed, and I feel like I definitely need to update this because hand traps are entirely different this format compared to last. Some hand traps that have been bad for so long are now incredibly good again, and some even more niche hand traps I think are going to find themselves in a pretty good spot this meta. So before I go over the tier list, I do want to let you guys know, Discord link down below along with all of our social media links. Also, I am trying to hit 14,000 subscribers, so if you enjoy this Yu-Gi-Oh content you like to see here, feel free to like and subscribe. It really helps me out and what I do here on the channel. And without further ado, let's start ranking some hand traps, starting with the tiers I have laid out. So the top tier is meta, which are going to be like the stuff you might want in your main deck or your side deck, cards that are very, very playable right now. Very strong, which are just really solid options if you want to play even more hand traps. Things that are still very, very good, but maybe not as good as things in the meta tier. Solid are definitely good options that might be deck specific, list specific. Things you might want to play that are still playable, but maybe not the best. Okay is essentially the same thing, but less good than solid. So these are the okay, but let's say outclassed. That's the word I'm looking for. They're decent options, but there's just better cards to play. And then not this format, which are cards that are just pretty much unplayable. Alright, so starting with the first one on the list, which is the Bestials. Magnamu is going to be representing all of the Bestials, and we're going to be ranking them as hand traps, right? Because the Bestials, if they're part of your engine, it's very different. Even if the Bestials are terrible, but you're playing something like Branded, right? You need to be playing some sort of Bestial package. Or Dragon Link, right? Where Bestials are part of your engine, so they're much better in that deck than other decks. So we're going to be ranking the Bestials as just generic hand traps, which I'm going to say they're okay. Maybe solid, because as hand traps, they don't hit a couple of the best decks in the format, which would be Kashtira, namely. Kashtira is definitely one of the bigger menaces of this list when talking about hand traps, but you also have things like Branded, Labyrinth, Drytron's pretty good. You have just a bunch of decks in the format, right? It's so open, and if you want to see all the decks and how I rank them, I actually have a best deck tier list you can check out on the channel. But the thing about the Bestials, right, is they do hit Branded. They're pretty solid versus the Branded strategy. They're good against things like Drytron. They're good against some light and dark decks that are generic, like Dragon Link. They can be okay. So, these hit a couple of decks. The big problem is you're going to be playing against a lot of decks in the format that do not play lights and darks. And it ends up making it to where these cards are just not that great in main decks. Maybe you could side an engine, but overall, I'm just going to say the Bestials are, I'm going to say solid. Ash Blossom, however, I'm going to put in meta. And I think Ash is better than she's been maybe ever, which is really weird to say because Ash has been just pretty mid for such a long time, just an okay hand trap. But the reason I'm going to say Ash is meta is because now she's not only a hand trap to stop your opponent, she also protects your board from so many important cards this format. So not only does Ash hit things like Sprite Starter, Branded Fusion, these plays your opponent's making, but they stop, or she specifically stops things like Triple Tactics Thrust and Book of Eclipse, cards that can break your board. So because of this, I think Ash is more important than she's been in a long time, in my opinion, so I'm going to put her in meta. Alright, next we have Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries, and this one's interesting because there are a couple of very powerful decks in the format that do have certain cards you want to banish, like Kashtira. Ghost Reaper's pretty good. Well, it's okay. I wouldn't say it's amazing, but it's not bad. And then you have, versus Branded, it's pretty solid. But, against both of those decks, Branded has always been able to sort of Lubellion, the Fusion Lubellion, their extra deck stuff back. And then I'm pretty sure, they could, Kashtira can put back their extra deck monsters with Theosis. I'd actually have to reread Theosis to see if you can actually do that. But it makes Cherries maybe not so great in those matchups. And it's a pretty open format, so I'm sort of thinking that Ghost Reaper isn't that great. And I'm going to put it in, well, I'm just going to say not this format. I don't think she's particularly good right now. Maybe if Theosis cannot add back banished, Kashtira extra deck cards, then maybe she's a little better, but I feel like the decks have counters to Ghost Reaper right now, so it's kind of weird. Contact C. Is Contact C good? I don't think so. Well, how good is it versus Kashtira, right? Like, I wonder if this card's actually good versus Kashtira or not. The thing is, maybe I'll put this in okay, but outclassed. It's like not, I'm gonna say not this format. I think there's much better cards to side against Kashtira anyways, even if this card is okay. Because it's level 6, so they can't exceed with it. They'd have to link with it, and they don't play many links. So, I don't know. I'm gonna say not this format. I think even if it's good against Kashtira, that other cards are better. So, I'm gonna put it here. DD Crow, I'm gonna put in solid. This card is like the more generic version of Bestials, so I actually think this might be a little better than the Bestials right now, but like still it's just an okay hand trap. Like it's okay versus branded, but it's terrible versus Kashtira. It's okay versus a lot of things, but I wouldn't say it's very strong. Cycle Reader, not this format. It hits exactly Drytron. Herald of Orange Light, why is it still on the tier list? I said I was going to remove this from the tier list and then I forgot to, so we're just not going to rank that card because it's too deck specific to rank, which I explained in my last hand trap tier list, but just forgot to take it off. Droll and Lock Bird. Now this card's interesting because I think this card is actually pretty good. It stops like some decks it does nothing right, but some decks it's actually very strong against. Like I think about Drytron coming back into the format and I'm like, yeah, this is okay. Kashtira gets quite a few searches, like they get Field Spell, Fenrir, Unicorn, and then if they start with Pot of Prosperity, that's 4 searches, so you're cutting off 3 of those if they open Pot of Prosperity, right? If they didn't, it's a little different. But, and then there's like Dragon Link this is good against. There's like Dinosaur got Lethal Sage on back to 3, so some people are trying to play that, I've seen. So I do think it's like a very strong side option. Maybe it's just solid because it doesn't like hit everything. But I think as a side deck option, Droll can be good when you look at the decks in the meta. And yeah, I'm willing to put this here. It's not that great versus branded or maybe even Kashtira, but it's not terrible. So I think Droll's okay. Effect Veiler, I'm gonna say is, I'm used to saying very strong, but I just don't think it's that good versus a couple of decks in the meta, but I think this card is just always a really solid option, and I like to rank Imperm with it as well. I think Imperm is obviously just like a lot better than Veiler, especially with Triple Tactics Thrust coming into the format. It's another card you kind of want to play around besides just talent, so it makes Imperm that much better than Veiler. Gamma, I think, is just a super good card. I'm gonna put it in very strong as well. Like Gamma is such a strong side deck option. It is pretty good in a lot of main decks as well. It's just a very solid go second card. And yeah, I think Gamma is just a really good pick overall. It's not that great versus some decks, but I think it's just a very powerful pick generically. There's very few matchups where branded is, or where Gamma is bad. Mourner, I'm gonna say solid. It's just like less good Veiler and Imperm. Now, this card does have implications for time, and there's also like some decks that need wind monsters, and that's when this card has its niche. But overall, yeah, just worse than Veiler most of the time, and then definitely less good than Imperm. Ghost Ogre, what do I think about Ghost Ogre? So Ghost Ogre against Kashtira hits Birth, which is pretty good. So that's not terrible, but that's almost like the only thing it really hits. It can hit the Mind Hacker as well, which is like maybe okay, because then they don't get the extra banish off of it. They just get to look in your extra deck. And I haven't really tested this too much against Kashtira, but it is good versus Birth for sure. Against Sprite, which is still around, it hits Gigantic, which is good. Against Branded, this card is overall not great, but because they started running like Branded Beast, Branded, well, not Branded Lost, that one's not going to work, but Branded Beast, Branded Regained, like this card can actually shut those down, which is solid. It just deals with an interrupt. But overall, not good versus branded. There's just so many decks in the format. How do you even judge something like Ghost Ogre? I actually think she's pretty solid. I don't think she is that bad. So, yeah, I'm willing to put her here. I think even potentially she might be here if people, like, wanted to play her. But I don't think she's main deck, and I don't think you would side deck her. So right now I say she's solid if you want to run, like, more hand traps. But she's not as good as these above her. Chaos Hunter, this is going to be weird. I'm going to put this in okay, but outclassed. A lot of people, especially going into this format, were really talking about Chaos Hunter because it just seems like a really good counter to Kashtira, which in some hands it may be, and I do think it's, like, I don't think it's wrong to think it counters Kashtira, but I do think this is outclassed as far as that's concerned because this card has a huge problem. that's sort of the fact that it's level 7 itself. Like, if you play this against Kashtira and they're able to make Big Eye, they can then steal the Chaos Hunter and then use it as a level 7 to continue their plays. Which, that's rough, but then this card special summons itself, so it also plays into Triple Tactics Thrust, which is also generically not that good. Like, things that summon themselves because of Thrust are a little less good than they used to be. So I feel like this card plays into two very big, like, cards. And then another one is well, this one doesn't matter as much, but, like, if you're... Well, no. I was going to talk about Ibly, but that doesn't really counter this card, because whatever they link into, you could special summon this there, so you're going to be fine. But besides that, it's still for all the other reasons I've said, I don't think Chaos Hunter is that great. So I'm going to put it in okay, but outclassed, I think. I think Big Eye and Thrust make this card a little weird, and it costs you a card. So, yeah, I'll put this here. Lancea, I'm going to say, is very strong. So, I just don't know what Kashtira really does if they get Lancea'd. So, like, it doesn't hit much else in the format. It hits, like... one part of Branded if they go for the line where they Branded Fusion to send Mercurier, and then they attempt to Bestial that Mercurier, and you Lancea that's pretty big, actually. It hits, like, a few rogue decks, it can hit dragons to some extent, but, like, most of the time it's just a side deck option for Kashtira, and I really don't know what they do. Like, they can't go for the Mind Hacker, they're not going to lock any of your zones, they can't, like, banish for Rise Heart. So I really don't know, like, maybe they just make a Rise Heart and pass. Like, I really don't know what they do if they get Lancea. It stops things like Prosperity. It can stop things like Evenly Match if you're looking for, like, some Evenly Match protection. So yeah, I think Lancea is actually one of the premier options for stopping Kashtira. And it also doesn't have to play into Triple Tactics Talent, because you can do it in Standby Phase. And it doesn't play into Thrust. So personally, I think Lancea is better than Chaos Hunter in almost every situation in my head, so I'm gonna say it's very strong. Arguably, it's like a meta side deck option, but I think there are other cards that stop Kashtira. Another big thing about Lancea is it doesn't lose to Ibly, which for the next card we're gonna talk about, that is very relevant. So yeah, I think Lancea is very strong. Alright, Nibiru, I'm gonna put in meta. So I think this card actually just, like, dominates this format. Historically, it's never been great versus Branded, but now with all the new lines they have, it actually can be good versus Branded if they don't play around it. It can dominate Kashtira. There's a bunch of rogue decks that are weak to Nibiru, or at least decks that get hurt by it, like Drytron, Plunder, Dragon Link. There's so many decks this format, it's hard to list them all. But this can hit almost every rogue deck. It can hit Sprite, especially if they don't play around it, because many go for the Sprint line first before Gigantic, so then they're able to be Nibiru'd, although this versus Sprite is still not a great card. It's a card where that if I was maining, I'd probably side it out against Sprite, especially if they see that I'm on it main deck. But yeah, I think versus just about everything, it is an insane card. Now, one thing about this card I did want to bring up, and I talked about it briefly when talking about Lancea, is Ibly. Ibly is seen to be a very popular card in Kashtira because, well, they've been playing it for a while, for the last couple weeks. Like as we got closer to Photon Hypernova's release. It's just a really good card to stop your opponent from playing. And it also stops Nibiru, which is huge because it gives them, that's one of their best counters besides like something like Cross Out Designator, to Nibiru. So I do think that is something to consider when playing this card. Yes, this thing, like Nibiru, hits much more than just Kashtira, but it's not, if I'm siding it for Kashtira, I really want to be wary that it's not going to be a side deck card if they open Ibly. So I'm having some struggles deciding which one I want to side as a Kashtira counter, personally, but that's just something I wanted to bring up in this tier list. Phantasme, not this format. I mean, Kashtira doesn't link, Branded doesn't link, those are two of the best decks. Labyrinth is one of the best decks, it doesn't link, so there's no reason to be maining or siding this card. Retaliating C, I'm gonna go ahead and say no. Again, like against all the decks I just listed, it's not that great. There's just not many decks this card actually hits. It's like okay versus Drytron, but you're not going to be seeing that much Drytron, right? So there's just two little decks to side this card right now. Just go ahead and add Token Collector here as well. Like Sword Soul is a very powerful deck, but not meta relevant enough to side Token Collector. So Unless Sword Soul becomes one of the main dominant threats, you won't really need to see this in your main or side. D-Shifter is very interesting because this card has been at the top of the tier list for so long, mainly because of tier limits. But with tier limits definitely going lower on the tier list, maybe like tier 1.5, tier 2, there's less reason to play D-Shifter because 2 of the best decks in the room, 3 of the best decks in the room with Kashtira, Labyrinth, Branded, and a few others, like even Sprite to an extent, they don't really lose to D-Shifter. So like, if you're, like, it's good versus some rogue decks, so I can see those decks still siding it, but as far as maining D-Shifter, I just don't think it's that good. Maybe it's a very strong option as like a side deck card for a lot of different matchups, but it could just be like solid because against like the best decks, it's just not that good, which is a big thing when talking about a tier list is what counters the best decks in the room, not like what counters the decks at locals, because that's a very different story. But as far as like countering the best decks in the room, I don't think D-Shifter is that great right now, so I'm just gonna put it in solid. Now if you are playing a deck that doesn't lose to D-Shifter, it still might be worth siding 3 copies just for the rogue matchups it falls into, and it really depends on how the format shapes up, because even like I'm thinking of a deck like Sword Soul that's really strong, it doesn't lose to Shifter either. So there's a lot of decks that just don't get hurt by Shifter, and that makes me think it's just a little less good this format. Sneaky C, this is still really new, not many people have tested with it, but I don't think it's that great. It's like, wait a second, hold up now, hold up. Let me think more about this card, because I was about to say it's not great versus Kashtira, but this card actually puts itself in face down defense position, right? So Fenrir can't banish it, and it still loses to, well, it still loses to Big Eye, doesn't it? Right? Because Big Eye can target a face down monster. Can Big Eye target a face down? I think it can. Maybe it can't. But Branded can get rid of this with Mirror Jade. Kashtira potentially can like Big Eye it. And then Shangri-Ira still doesn't die, so... And Arise Heart can banish it anyways. There's too many decks that can like deal with this card once it's already on the board, so I just think it's not this format. But in the future, I would like to see this card get some play. I think we just need to find a format where it's pretty good. Skullmeister, I'm going to say okay, but outclassed. I generally think DD Crow is a better card. But this can hit things like Nimble Angler against Sprite. It can hit things like the tier spells and traps that hit Graveyard. So like it does have a use, but I'm going to say DD Crow is generally better in most situations. So okay, but outclassed. Dogwood, meta. This card, I don't know if this card will ever leave meta in my opinion. As long as the time rules exist, I think Dogwood is an irreplaceable card. If you do not have a built-in time win condition in your engine, like Red Resonator for Sprite, or like Volcanic Scattershot for decks with Sprint in it, or even like Evil Twin Runic Sprite can play the Evil Twin continuous spell that burns and gains. So if you don't have an inbuilt win condition like those, a card like Dogwood, there's just no better card in the game. This card is so ridiculously powerful, so I'm going to put it in meta, which as far as like a hand trap to stop your opponent, it's never been like the best, right? But when you're down to game 3 with 4 minutes left on the clock, there is no card in the entire game as powerful as Dogwood. It's just so insane. So I think she's a meta hand trap. And then Belle, which for some reason got deleted off my last tier list, so I had to re-put her in. I don't know, that was some weird thing with like the image file. But yeah, Ghost Belle. I'm gonna say she is very strong. It just depends, right? Like, I actually maybe solid with tier limits out of the format. Belle hits a lot of things that, you know, something like what was I about to say? DD Crow or the Bestials don't. Like, Belle can be defensive, so against Labyrinth, it can hit Big Welcome Labyrinth, it can hit Ice Dragon's Prison, it can hit cards like those, right? Like your opponent's Bestials, DD Crows, it can hit things like Gamma, so Belle has always been a little more versatile than things like Crow, in my opinion, but with the decks in the format, particularly Branded. Branded is one you would think Belle is good against, and we've seen this in the past when we had the Branded Sword Soul format, where Belle actually got less good because of Branded Lost, where you couldn't negate Branded in red, but Crow took up the popular spot because it could play under Branded in red. So, like, that's the issue with Belle versus something like that, but it's okay versus Labyrinth being able to hit Big Welcome. It's good versus Drytron. It's good versus tier limits, obviously, so it still is solid, but I don't think it's as good as these. Droll is one I'm a little not sold on. I really don't know how Droll is going to play out in the format. This was sort of a preemptive look, right? The format's only been 2 days. I've played a little bit of it, but, you know, it still could go either way. So tell me down below what you think of this tier list. Do you think any of these placements are wrong? How would you have placed them? I'll definitely read those down below, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like and subscribe. This has been Aaron from Top Tier Gaming. Bye, YouTube.